All right, we are live. Welcome, welcome, welcome to Making Cancer Fun. And I am super excited because this is my new friend, Gabrielle Wescoe. We actually met through the Clubhouse app. And I've been checking out her Instagram and following her. And guys, I'm so excited for you to hear from her today because these are always my favorite people to bring onto our webinar. Gabrielle is obviously a childhood cancer survivor, as you can see. And I remember as a parent when we were kind of in the midst of it, and everybody we were meeting, they were also in the midst of it, or their kids were in critical care. And I didn't really know any survivors. I had one friend who reached out to me and revealed that he had been a survivor. And it was like, what? You're a grown-up. And so I so wanted to find those people who had not just gone through treatment, but had come out and were living these beautiful lives. And it was like, okay, that's the hope that I can have for my daughter. And so, Gabrielle, I so appreciate you taking your time for being here and for being, willing to vulnerably share your story with us, because you are what parents like me hold on to for that hope. And you probably have no idea how inspiring you are. Because we kind of go, can my child have that? Can my child, grow up and have this life that's not so connected to cancer, right?
Yes.
So kind of tell her, share your story with us. Tell us a little bit about your experience, how old you were, your diagnosis. We want to hear from you.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be able to be here and to talk with you. I was diagnosed with cancer when I was 10 years old. So it was right after my 10th birthday. I was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. At the time I was diagnosed, 98% of my bone marrow was filled with cancer, and I also had lesions on my liver. So it was super rare to have leukemia and then also have it on my liver. So I'm in the medical books for that one.
Wow.
Yes. I got a port, I had chemo, I had spinal taps, bone marrows, that whole deal. Anyone that's on treatment knows the protocol. Went through that for 2.5 years, waited the 5 years to be pronounced cured. I am doing so well. I have 2 children of my own. I'm 23. I have a 2-year-old and I have a 6-month-old. I'm married. Life has just been so amazing. Like, cancer was such a hard thing, but it was such a blessing to me because it opened so many doors and so many opportunities and really just was a catalyst to push me forward in life. And I didn't have a lot of the pit stops I saw my friends have and a lot of different struggles because I knew my purpose and I know how precious life is. And it's just given me such a different perspective.
So it's interesting. So when you went in and at 10 years old, obviously you're much older than my daughter was, right? So you had a different understanding than she did, or some of these younger kiddos. So did they, and I don't know, my daughter didn't have blood cancer. So when you say 98%, I'm like, oh my gosh, how is that even possible? What kind of prognosis did they give you? And did they tell you, like, at 10 years old, what did you know and what didn't you know versus now as an adult and understanding in a different way, right?
So my parents were very transparent the whole entire time. My mom and dad promised that anytime the doctor talked to them, I would be in the room because I was very curious and I wanted to know everything. So obviously my parents let me know everything about my treatment. My doctors would explain exactly what was going to happen to me, exactly what I was going to go through. And I understood it was serious, but I didn't understand the gravity of it until much later. I didn't really realize how sick I was until I look back. I know that the doctors had told my parents multiple times to be ready to say goodbye to me, but I know that I didn't know that. I knew all the treatment that I was going through. I knew all of the medical side of it, but I didn't understand the severity of it. Like, I didn't realize how sick I was. I watched a lot of my friends pass away, and I was seeing them and kind of just watching that happen to them and just praying. And I was very okay with the fact that that might be my reality, but I didn't necessarily think that it was going to be. Like, I didn't understand, like I keep saying, the severity of what I was going through.
So it sounds like you and your parents really didn't have that conversation. We talk a lot about like, I never had to have that conversation with Emily because she was really young and she didn't understand. But it sounds like even at 10, you
Yeah.
guys really didn't have to have that.
No, I think
Mm.
that my family, we are really strong Christians and really strong believers. So what we did was just put our faith and our hope in God. And one night when I was in the hospital, it was 3 o'clock in the morning. My parents never left me alone, and my mom woke up from a dead sleep, and she just felt the urge and opened her Bible to Luke 8:50, and the verse reads, "Just believe and she'll be healed." And my whole entire time, my parents hung on to that and prayed that over me. And God has been so faithful. I am healed. I'm cured, and now I get to live for Jesus and tell people like God is so good, and no matter what you go through, there's hope for you.
Wow. That is, so you don't know this. You and I have a very similar story there because what I'm hearing is that your mom was really given a verse for you to
Yeah.
pray over you. And, obviously, we people of all different faiths. And so, for me, I'm a Christian, so I had a verse, but I think it's having that mantra or that
Yeah.
assurance of what you put over your daughter. So I had something similar. Everybody kept sending like cards and gifts and verses. And it's one everybody knows, Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not harm you, plans to give you hope in the future. And had a similar experience where all of a sudden it was like I was reading one night and God was like, no, this is not my promise for you. This is my promise for your daughter.
Yeah.
And kind of like your mom just held on to that and would pray over her for, I know the plans I have for you, Emily, plans to prosper you and not harm you. And it's funny because now that she's 15, she'll be like, I know, Mom, it's my verse. And I've even gone in her room and put just Jeremiah 29:11 like around her door and around her windows. And I'm like, Emily, this is God's promise to you. And whenever I get nervous, and I'm sure your mom had this, you go get those scans and you're like, or you get those blood works and you're sitting there just like in a state of, I'm trying not to panic. I'm trying not to panic, right?
Yeah.
And I would just repeat that to myself over and over again. Like, this is God's promise. So you just gave me chills when you said that yours is, and that it was specifically, she will be healed.
Yeah. It was
Like,
amazing.
wow, what confidence.
And even now, like you were saying, when I go for scans or when I have to go get blood work and I get anxious, because now I feel that and now I feel the weight of it. And every time I have to get something done, I just like pray over that verse and remember how far I've come and how healthy I am, and not to let fear get a hold of me.
Yeah. And one of the things I noticed that was interesting with when I asked for your bio, I think you actually specifically have in it say, I'm cured.
Hmm.
And, so often I will say it really made me kind of step back and go, wow, am I claiming that as boldly as you are for my daughter? Because I think often we have survivors and we use the word, well, you're a survivor, but we're so reluctant to claim that word cure,
Yeah.
right? Because of those long-term effects and those late effects, and cure almost makes it sound like it's shutting the door, like that's over, which we all want, but I think we're all kind of scared to shut that door. So
Yeah.
and I do want to talk with you a little bit about your daughter, your children and stuff. But for you to say you're cured, okay, and knowing that obviously there's late effects and all of those things that I'm sure you see other adult, how, I guess for you, is there a mental piece of standing in that I'm cured? And how do you balance that out with knowing that I have to go every year for these things? And it sounds like you still go, because I also know a lot of childhood survivors that one of the things, and I worry about this a little bit with my daughter, is that once they get to a certain age and their parents can't make them go, they're like, I'm not going anymore. I'm not going to my follow-up. So how have you navigated through that as you've become an adult?
Well, to be honest with you, it was a challenge for a really long time. I have been off chemo for quite a long time at this point. I'm 23, so I think it's been at least 10 years that I've been off. I finished when I was 13. Yeah, so it's been at least 10 years. So I have a few late-term effects. Like I have bony infarcts in my legs. If you don't know what that
I
is,
don't know what that is.
it's basically dead bone. Like I have little circles of dead bone. They don't bother me unless it's cold. I get like neuropathy, random stuff like that. But I really try not to focus on the negatives. I really try to just be thankful for the health that I do have, for the ability to walk, for the ability to talk, for the ability just to function normally like a human. Instead of focusing on that part of my life, I really focus on the healthy part of my life and where I am today. And I really try to never forget the fact that I had cancer, I actually have a tattoo that says believe because of that verse. And every day when I wake up and I look at it, I know like I just have to believe in the Lord and believe in his promises and be reassured that I am cured. And I can walk confidently and know that I'm cured, know that that promise is fulfilled, and I can do everything in my power. I'm a holistic nutritionist, so I do everything in my power to keep myself healthy, to not allow toxins into my home with my children, and just not allowing cancer to be a whole cloud over my life. For a really long time, I just kept rooting my identity in it, and I had to take a step away from even speaking at any cancer events for a while, and just close that door so that I could heal and I could move forward and I could recognize that that's a part of me, but I don't live in that anymore. I am able to live freely and have a normal life.
That's really powerful because the identity piece of, I think a lot of times childhood cancer survivors, the identity is so rooted in that. And so for you, how did you move away from that? Because somebody had asked my daughter recently, like, what would you want somebody to know about a childhood cancer survivor, or about being a childhood cancer survivor? And she's like, nothing. I don't want to be known for that.
Yeah.
And she really, it's very similar, like that's part of who I am, but that's not what I want to be known for. So for you, how have you balanced that? And I guess if you have tips for us as parents, because sometimes, and so for if you guys are watching, the studies show that up to 35% of parents have PTSD after a childhood cancer diagnosis, but that the parents and the siblings have a higher rate of PTSD than the actual patient. Because the kids themselves, like Gabrielle themselves, they're really resilient. And interestingly enough, they found that the PTSD that survivors have is usually more related to the loss of their friends. And you touched on that, of watching the other people that they had become close to, their peers, versus their own illness, which is very, interesting. So how have you navigated that? And how has that been for your parents? Because do you find that your parents still kind of stay stuck in the cancer story and you've tried to move out of it? Or do you feel like all of you together have done that? Like, particularly for parents who are struggling to move past that.
Oh, definitely. I completely understand that. Touching on the PTSD really quick, I can't speak for my parents or my sister, but I can speak for myself. I know that I have really bad PTSD whenever I'm in the hospital or I get a needle. That's been something that I've had to really work through, and I get myself really worked up about. And it's not the pain of it, because that doesn't compare to pain that we go through as cancer survivors. It's the psychological. So as soon as the needle goes in, I have a PTSD attack. So I do struggle with that a little bit, but as I have just tried to work through it and started going to counseling and just been so open about it, and my husband prays over me anytime I get blood work, and he's always there for me. I've really started to slowly overcome that. Like last time I had a needle was when I had Luke 6 months ago, and I didn't have a PTSD attack, and that was huge, and that was so amazing. But moving out of the cancer world, I think for a really long time, I was so stuck in that. And I started a business when I was 15, and it was really branded around the fact that I was a cancer survivor. And I created these products because of being a cancer survivor, and I wanted to make a difference. So when I started to have different interests, and when I started to just move on with my life and go back to normalcy, when I started just pursuing a career outside of that, and when I just started pursuing normal life, I started to shed those parts of me. And now I find myself barely ever talking about it. Of course, I'll talk about it in conversations and I'll bring it up, but it's part of my life, but it's not who I am. And the further I get away from it and the more I submerge myself into normal life, the less it's part of my identity, and the more it's just part of who I was.
I love the word I heard you say earlier was freedom.
Yeah.
There's a freedom of disassociating from that.
Yeah.
Because you so are very on point, particularly, again, I see with parents, it almost seems easier for the kids to move away. And as parents, it's harder for us. And so many parents who struggle with, the day that my daughter was diagnosed, I become really depressed. I can't get out of bed. I can't move. The day that the treatment was ended. And these are with survivors, not even, it's obviously a different story if you've lost your child, but for the survivors, and this inability to let go. Have you found it easier for you than for your parents? Like, has that ever been a conversation, or do you feel your parents have been equally like, let's just kind of put this in the past?
I think it's been a balancing act. For us, I know I can speak for my family by saying I know it's been God, and I know it's been through God and through Jesus and through knowing our identity in Him. I know it was harder for my parents to let me go and let me grow up.
Mm.
I know that was a huge struggle for my parents. And when I wanted to get married and move out on my own and start doing my own life and just taking control, that was a really big struggle because my parents had me as their baby and they had protected me and they had almost lost me so many times. So letting go of that and allowing me to take care of myself was definitely something that I know was really hard for them.
That makes me nervous when you say that. I'm thinking about my daughter. I'm like, yes, you're right.
Exactly. And especially having the layer of cancer and having to protect me was like huge for them. But I know that when I was in high school and I started to play tennis, I would get really frustrated with kids because they'd complain about their hair or they'd complain about stupid things. And I'd be like, this is ridiculous. Like, I cannot relate to this. And I was at such a different level. And to those people, like, that was really important. And I understand that now. But looking back, I was just so annoyed by it. And it was just so like frustrating to me. And my parents had to sit me down and be like, listen, not everybody has gone through what you go through. And you have to be understanding towards that. And if you want to feel like them, you can't always bring it up. Like, you can't always talk about it. You kind of have to step away from it. And stepping away from it and just pursuing normal life kind of just started to happen normally.
Wow. So when you graduated, I know you do holistic health now and you're
Yes.
really into the non-toxin. So do you feel that do you feel like you would have done that either way, or was that a result really of your cancer?
I think that is probably a result of my cancer because after my treatments, my parents started looking into different ways to help my body heal. And the first thing we went to was acupuncture, massage, chiropractic. My mom really started to understand the way that foods affect our body, and then that bled into me. And now I'm a holistic nutritionist. I am just like coming out with my own line of essential oils. Like, I am such a huge advocate for taking care of your body because your health is actually only a very small portion genes and a much larger portion of your life choices.
Interesting. So how fascinating to think that maybe you would have gone on a completely different path,
Yeah,
right?
definitely would have.
And how that's pieced of it. So what I found really interesting, and I want to be sensitive to this topic about what you're comfortable talking about and what you're not. What I found super interesting was when you said, oh yeah, I have 2 children, like no problem. And, I've been kind of open that we're just starting to have that fertility conversation. So, which really I approached it as very much, oh, we'll just wait and see. And I went to the Coalition Against Childhood Cancer conference like 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago, I guess now, because it was pre-COVID. And I was talking to this wonderful woman about, in the worst case, she won't be able to have children, but she survived cancer. Like, so that's not a big deal. And then right afterwards, Gabrielle, she gets up on stage and she's presenting, and her topic was on like psychological effects for childhood cancer survivors, and that the number one trauma is that they can't have children and their parents don't think it's a big deal because they're like, well, they survived cancer. I was like, oh, that was totally what I just said. And about how now there is a much more proactive approach to start girls at like 14, 15 years old, going through, just test them to check their fertility, all of that, than there was maybe years ago, because that wasn't even really a conversation when we were going to treatment. And so I think as a parent is definitely like that nervousness, right? We want everything perfect for our child. So for you, was that ever a conversation? Was that ever something that was important to you? I know that sometimes survivors want to have children earlier because of that. Did that play into it? But I also know survivors. I know a woman who I met there and she was like, yeah, I'm a leukemia survivor. I had 2 children. I didn't even know that was an issue. And after I had my kids, my mom was like, oh yeah, we kind of worried about that. She's like, I had no idea. Right. So it's like, well, which do you do? Because we also know that just totally healthy women who have no history, if they get nervous about having a baby, it stops their ability to have a baby. Right. So I feel like there's this funny little line that we try to navigate. So I think for a lot of families, this is a huge conversation, and whatever you're comfortable sharing or talking about would be valuable.
I'm completely open about talking about anything. Okay, you can ask me anything.
That's a personal question.
Yeah,
you know?
I'm a pretty open book. I actually I've always wanted to be a mom, like no doubt in my mind. I always knew I wanted to be a mom. And I had many conversations with my doctors, like, hey, am I going to be able to have kids? I remember talking to my mom distinctively in the car one day and saying, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to have kids. Like, I have so much scar tissue in my back. Like, I have so much pain. Like, how am I going to be able to carry babies? And I remember sitting down with my nurse practitioner and my doctors and then saying, listen, like, there's a really good chance you're not going to be able to have kids. Like, if you want to have kids, like, you should really invest in freezing eggs, or you should look into alternative methods. And I was always like, okay, like, all right. And I remember talking to my parents about it and wanting to do it. And for whatever reason, we didn't. And I ended up getting pregnant really easily with my first son, Caden, and then with my second son, Luke, like no problem at all. So I've had no issues with it. I am a huge reason why I want to have my kids young, and I want to have all my kids super young, is so that I am able to carry them and I'm in the best condition, and everything my body's went through, I just want to be as young as possible to have them.
So from that standpoint, it was a little bit choice of like maybe have them a little bit younger.
Yes.
Okay. So it sounds like they never even really did the testing on you to like see.
Nope.
You just were like, wow.
Yep.
And that gives me chills. Like I literally get chills just because, again, I think it's so much what you embody for me is just that hope, because we hear the stats. And I think from the time our kids get diagnosed, you heard like what their percentage is, what their stage is, what their cure rate is.
Yeah.
They get done with treatment and then we're told all of the horrible things that you could look forward to. I remember that when we got done with treatment, I got a book. It was like a thick book, like and I threw it out in the hospital. I'm sorry to whoever wrote the book, but I just remember being like, I don't want to put this in my brain. I don't even want to know, like, if this stuff comes up, I'll deal with it, but I don't even want to like plant those seeds.
Yeah. I remember getting that book too. And I was like reading it and I was like, what? But like, what do I have to look forward to? But honestly, I went to a camp and it's called Camp Can Do. It's in Hershey, PA. And I don't know if you're familiar with it. So everybody that goes to that camp has cancer. All the kids there are cancer survivors. And all of our counselors have either, for the most part, they're cancer survivors or have some deep connection to be volunteering there. And there's a team of nurses and doctors. But anyway, all of my camp counselors that I have seen that were that have kind of grown up essentially with me, they were RAs when I was a first patient, and then eventually they became full-blown counselors, and then eventually I've seen them all leave camp to go have their own kids and their own families. So for the most part, I've seen a lot of people from that camp community go on and live normal lives and have babies and do very well.
Wow. So isn't that such a testament to like what we surround ourselves and what we let into our brains and what we believe?
Yeah.
Now, did you have, when you were pregnant, did they do anything different, I guess, or were there any protocols that you had to follow differently because of your medical history, or was it just, nope, just have a baby? Like,
they wanted to do a few extra ultrasounds just to make sure, but not really. They're just kind of like, you're healthy. Your baby's healthy, everything's coming up normal. With Caden, I know that they're a little bit more precautious, but Caden was perfectly healthy. And when we had my second son, Luke, it was just normal like anybody else.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it's
That's
so
super
cool.
amazing.
So amazing. I personally didn't get an epidural or any medication because I didn't want anything that would remind me of a spinal tap or anything like that. I wanted to do everything holistic, as holistic as possible, and didn't want any medication. So that was such a blessing to be able to do that, and my doctors to respect that.
So that's so interesting because you can understand from the holistic standpoint, but really what I'm hearing from you too is also it would be triggering, like emotionally triggering to have all that. Well, and I guess after you've gone through cancer, I mean, childbirth, you're probably like, dude, I'm good. Like really, right? You're thinking that's probably the thing that women think of, oh, the most pain I'll ever have. And you're like, I was 10, I'm done. Yeah.
That was a huge part of my thought process because I have such a high pain tolerance now. Like my husband always jokes, like stuff just doesn't faze me. Like I just have such a high pain tolerance. So when I was in birth, like I was totally fine up until transition, like the last part. I was like laughing, making jokes. Like the nurses were like, "Are you sure?"
Oh my
Like when I came into the
gosh.
hospital, I had my kids, they're like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah, pretty sure they're pretty close with Luke." And they broke my water with him, and he was a 3-hour labor. My first labor was 7 hours, but I was able to handle the pain up until transition, and obviously still through there, I was able to handle it. It was not fun, and it was very painful the last part, but it wasn't anything scary because I had gone through so
Oh,
much pain.
wow.
Yeah.
So this is another question we bring up often with survivors. We've had a few survivors who are married. And again, as a parent, one of the things we're always like is someone going to want to marry my child? Like they bring all of these medical issues. And um, we had a woman on here talking about how just the idea that, health insurance as a spouse of somebody who's like, when she got engaged, her parents sat down, her future husband was like, she will always need health insurance, like those types of conversations that you might not need to have if you didn't have the medical history. So for you navigating like dating and stuff as a teenager, did everybody just kind of know like that your husband, he just kind of knew, oh yeah, she's the girl who at some point had cancer and it wasn't a big deal? Or was that a conversation you have to bring to the table for somebody? And how do you decide when and how do you navigate that?
So I know in middle school and high school, everybody just kind of knew I had cancer. And I think a lot of guys were like freaked out by it for the most part, but a lot of guys weren't. Like a lot of people are just like, that's a girl that had cancer, that's Gabby. And I have such like a bubbly personality that everybody kind of just knew me as Gab, and I was just around, and they knew I had cancer, but I was just me. I was never like, oh, that girl that had cancer, because that wasn't my personality. I was always with everybody, wanting to be with people, wanting to play sports, wanting to be as normal as possible. And when I met my husband, I met him the summer I graduated high school, the summer going into college. And when I met him, I never specifically had a conversation with him where I was like, I had cancer. It was in my Instagram bio. I casually had brought it up in conversations. It was never anything like a big deal. And with him, it's never like a big deal. Like he always goes to any blood, like he goes to all my blood work. So he's there for me. I had a cancer scare 2 summers ago. It was nothing. It was actually ended up being my bony infarcts, but he was there every step of the way. It's just a part of who you are. And if that's the right person for you, it's not going to be an issue. If somebody's making it an issue, then they're not the person you're supposed to marry.
100%. And you bring up an interesting point because, when I was your age, obviously there was no Instagram. So you had to reveal a lot about yourself. But I guess that's true now. If you meet somebody and you go onto their social media, you're kind of going to get that pretty quick from what they are.
And I was already pretty much so, like, I was always public speaking. At the point when we met, I had a very successful business. So I was public speaking all the time. I was always on the news, always in magazines. My Instagram already had like thousands and thousands of followers. So a lot of me was out there. So he got to read tons about me before even really like going on a first date.
Oh my gosh. He must have been like, that's a little creepy too, being like, you know all about me. I don't know much about you. Okay. So tell me like with what you do now, because you're talking about I'm on, television and news articles, and obviously you've done this whole inspiring honey. So tell us more like about that piece of you.
So what I currently do now is I full-time am a homemaker, so I fully take care of my children. And then my husband and I also run our own business. So I own Inspiring Honey, which is a faith-based business, and also our own line of essential oils are launching very, very soon, which I'm so excited. They're actually going to come out at the end of this month. And that is what I do. I host a podcast. I run a blog. I have my own shop. I write books. I do public speaking. I coach people on social media. I feel like I wear like a ton of different hats, but it just kind of all blends in perfectly.
I like how you just listed like 5 careers that you have, and then you're like, but I just stay home and take care of my kids. Like I'm an at-home mom. You're like, but meanwhile, I'm doing this, this, and this, and this. So I haven't asked you this before, but where did the name Inspiring Honey come from?
The name Inspiring Honey comes from Proverbs 16:24. So it actually started when I was 19 years old. It was the second LLC that I ever opened. And it was from Proverbs 16:24. I was writing for the Huffington Post at this point, and I was public speaking
And what were you writing about? What were you mostly speaking about and writing about?
So what I was mostly writing about was inspiration. So on the Huffington Post, I was basically writing inspirational articles, uplifting articles. And what I was public speaking about was business advice and childhood cancer. And when I started Inspiring Honey, I had the opportunity to publish my book. I then decided not to do it at that point. I was 19 years old, had no idea what I wanted to do. And I came up with, God gave me the name Inspiring Honey from Proverbs 16:24. Everything I do is surrounded by words. And it's stuck to this day. That's what the LLC is under. That's what all of my websites, what I'm under online. And I just think it's so cool for the books that I write, for the podcasts that I post, for everything that I share. Like, I want it to be kind words like honey and healing to people's bodies.
So what is that Proverbs verse?
Kind words are like honey, sweet to the soul, and healing to the body, which is just so important. And being a holistic nutritionist now, like, looking back then, I loved it, but I didn't understand how significant it would be. And now being a holistic nutritionist, right, and also being like in ministry, being in business, everything I do is surrounded by words, and also all the knowledge I have with food is able to heal. So it just goes like hand in hand.
Oh, I love that. That's beautiful.
Thank you. I love it.
You have an interesting perspective because, as it's always such a difficult conversation, I think, when you talk about faith and when you talk about cancer. Like I tell people all the time, I believe that Western medicine, yes, thank goodness, right? Like my daughter's surgeon was a saving angel. I mean, truly, the woman's an angel in our life. But she was also shrouded in prayer, like thousands of people that were praying for her. And I believe that that's why, but then you also see families who they prayed just as much as you did, right? They prayed just as much as I did. They loved their children just as much as I did. And regardless of how much prayer, even more prayer, and they don't have their child anymore. So have you had people be triggered or even react negatively to the fact that you so stand in that God healed me, where they go, well, God didn't heal this person, God didn't heal that? And how have you, as the survivor, navigated that type of understandable, right, reaction from somebody?
That is a really good question. I actually got asked this recently on a podcast that I was on, and the way that she phrased it was, how do you react to people when they say, well, why did you survive and so didn't? And that is such a tough question, and I obviously don't have all the answers, right? I don't know why, but I know that God is sovereign, and I trust in his plans, and I trust him so much. I lost some of my best friends. I actually lost a best friend on my birthday, right? So my birthday has kind of like it's not my favorite day of the year, because I also lost a best friend to cancer that day, and somebody who was like my big brother, who I talk about all the time. Actually, his kid rocking chair is in my playroom right now because his mom gave it to my sons. They passed away, but I genuinely believe that God has a purpose for everybody, and everyone's life counts. And I think that God is so graceful and so loving, and there's a lot about him that we can't understand, and that's where obedience comes in. That's where surrenderance comes in, and it's just such a hard thing to balance. But I know that there is nothing that goes wasted, and no matter what pain we go through, no matter what we walk through, it can always be used for good, and it can always be used to help somebody else.
Yeah, it's a tough, and I think I'm inspired by how boldly you do talk about your faith. For me, God is such a huge part of my life, and it's not something that I boldly talk about the way that you do. So people like you always truly inspire me, and kind of, I feel like a little push, like God's like, come on. And because I've talked about that, there was a time when I did think that M had relapsed, and it was the end of treatment. And at that point, it wouldn't have been about a cure. It would have been about prolonging life, and really like locking myself in the bathroom, getting on my hands and knees and being like, God, I'm not leaving. Like, you have to tell me if she's going to live or not. Like, I can't take this anymore. And where God met me was not nice. What he basically was not comforting. What he said was like, who are you? Like, who are you to demand to know that? Like, I'm her father. I love her more than you do.
Yeah.
And she will be here as long as I have her here. And how long would she have to live for you to feel like it was long enough? And the reality is you can survive childhood cancer, and you can be walking across the street at 20 years old and get hit by a car, right? You can, be in your 30s and be in in an accident. And so it was like, at what point would you feel like it was long enough? Because it's not just cancer. Every day, everything that we do is a risk, right? And it was a very tough, like, wow, you're right. Like, we have so little control.
Yeah, we do.
And, she's going to be, getting her permit next year. And she's like, I'm going to drive a car. And I'm like, no, you're not.
Yeah.
When you talk about your parents not wanting to, like, I'm like, I get that. I'm like, you can't get in a car. And then she's like talking about boys. I'm like, there are no boys. What are we talking about?
Yeah.
So it's and what's interesting, and it would be interesting to, talk to your mom, because she and I talk about this, is that you go through the same experience, but it's two separate experiences.
Definitely.
Your mom's experience isn't your experience. And as a parent, acknowledging and respecting that our kids have their own experience, and we can't shape that or make it right or make it wrong.
Yeah.
Particularly for parents who then become really invested in the childhood cancer world, but have kids who are like, hey, dude, I'm going on and living my life. That's kind of where my daughter's at, right?
Yeah.
So with your holistic background, and again, it's always that fine line, because one of the things I will say I regret not doing is that when Em got out of cancer, my life was in a crazy place at that point. I was going through divorce and all this different stuff. And I wish now, looking back, that I had literally like left the hospital and had gone directly to the homeopath and like detoxed her, because I felt like it was, you pump them through poison.
Yeah.
And then ring a bell and bye, go have a cake and celebrate and go home, right? And a couple of years after that, she was diagnosed with a super, super rare autoimmune disease. That they really don't have any childhood cancer survivors who have this super, super rare disease. There's not a lot of children with it. So nobody really knew how to treat it. And at that point, I went back and I said, well, before we do anything, I'm going to take her to a homeopath. I'm going to change her diet. I'm going to, do this. They gave her a whole detox thing and whatnot. And she's in remission for that. And what's been crazy is they said, well, we don't know that any of that actually made a difference. Okay. And she ended up doing treatment. So she did do treatment. We did a combination of both. She needed treatment. Yeah. We did this first. And I wish I had done that earlier on. I often wonder how it would have been different if I had done that early on. So what advice do you have for, families who are maybe coming off of treatment or in treatment, or kind of they're out of treatment, but now they haven't really done that? Because I think there's this tendency to be like, well, detoxing your house isn't going to cure you of cancer, right? And it's like, okay, but that's a piece of our environment. So what do you do differently now, or what do you do for your children, or what do you wish you would have done maybe earlier on?
So I think that there has to be a fine line and a balance. I am a huge believer in holistic health. So is my family, right? Everybody in my life. Actually, it's kind of funny. Like, my in-laws are very holistic. My parents are very holistic. My mom actually works for a pharmaceutical company. So it is a balance, right?
So were they like that before you had cancer?
Yes.
Okay. So
holistic, yes, to a point.
Okay.
Like, to a point, my mom always cared about it and always had knowledge of it, but not as invested as they are now. So I think that there has to be a balance. And somebody may say, well, removing bleach or Clorox or whatever from my home isn't going to cure me of cancer. No, but it possibly is going to help lessen the effects, and it's actually going to change you. And my mom and dad stopped cleaning with bleach and Clorox and all of that after I was off chemo. And anytime I smell it now, anytime I'm at anybody's home that has it, I actually end up throwing up, because I'm so sensitive to toxins now.
Wow.
It makes me so sick. And if you actually step back and you start looking at the ingredients in these common products, and you actually look at them and you realize what they do, right? You may think, I'm spraying it on my counters. How's it going to affect me? Well, you're rubbing it, you're touching your counters, it's going into your air, cleaning sprays, it's going to affect you. So many different toxins that we inhale deeply affect us. It might not be today, but it accumulates in our bodies. We have lymph nodes, and if our lymph nodes are being filled with toxic deodorant, then our body is going to be backed up, and our lymphatic system is basically like our line of defense. And if that's backed up, our body is going to be able to create more toxins. I could honestly talk about this forever. But one thing that I really do is I make sure that I DIY most of my products. Most of my products are plant-based, and they're truly sourced from the earth, because a lot of companies just greenwash things. You can't trust them. You have to read the labels, and you have to know what you're using. I will not use conventional deodorant. I will not use conventional toothpaste. I cook as much as I can organic, plant-based, grass-fed.
Oh, I feel like you need to do a cooking series for
Yes,
us.
yes, I love to. It's one of my favorite things because food is so healing.
Well, that's, that whole saying, right? Let food be our medicine.
Yes.
And yet we never talk about that.
Yes, and I am such a huge component of essential oils. Like, essential oils have been used for thousands of years, and there's so much science backing up how they actually work and what they do for us. And herbs are so amazing. And actually, all medicine is derived from plants and herbs. So imagine if, instead of taking those pills, sometimes when we have different things, like my husband had a cold, and instead of giving him over-the-counter medicine, I make him tonics with herbs, or I make little throat lozenges with herbs. Just doing things from a plant-based view instead of going to the store, grabbing the ingredients itself and making it from that.
You know, it's so interesting. So my grandmas were kind of like these hippies, like back before they had them. So I was a kid then they raised my mom, and then I grew up in a house where, like, we weren't allowed to eat white bread, we weren't allowed to eat nitrates, we weren't allowed to drink soda. So this is the irony of my life. I have my daughter, and Gabby, literally, I would go every Sunday to 3 different organic food stores, buy her all of her organic food, and hand puree all of her baby food. Like, the child, her first piece of sugar was her birthday cake, and she, like, spit it out on her first birthday. I think she was like 3. It was before she had cancer, but she was like probably about 2.5, 3 years old before she even had a soda. And it was only because we were someplace where they didn't have any water. Yeah. And I gave her like a Sprite, and she's like, it's like the spicy stuff in my mouth. And people be like, what do you feed this kid? And then she gets cancer, right? Like, it was the complete irony of life. And it's interesting because I had a doctor say to me one time, I was early in, and I was very upset about the diet in the hospital and what was available for children to eat on the menu, right? Because I'm like, we don't eat like this. And I had this resident say to me, he was like, well, we have found, and I don't know if this is true or not, this is what he said to me. He said, we have found that children who have very poor eating, like bad diets and bad food intake, they do better through cancer treatment, because while you've been giving her very strong cells, you've also been giving her very strong cancer cells. Mm-hmm. And I was like, and almost like she would have been better had she been kind of like a malnourished, bad nutrition and all of that. But what's interesting to me is now, you know, turning almost 15 and very similar to you, I mean, wears hearing aids from her chemo, but really other than that, doesn't have these really severe late effects. And I wonder how much of that is contributed to that the first 3 years of her life, she had really a clean, super, super clean, organic, you know, non-GMO, all of that kind of stuff diet. And I found it frustrating, and I don't know what your parents' experience was, but I found it very frustrating in the hospital because I wanted to put her on a plant-based diet. I wanted to get sugar out of her diet, all of these things that we know make a difference in adult cancers. And what I was met with is that there's no research in children's cancers on that. We can't recommend that. We can't, even when she got her autoimmune disease, I put her on a gluten-free diet. And the doctor said, well, I can't recommend that because there's no studies for that. And I'm like, well, there's tons of studies with gluten and autoimmune diseases, but they're on adults. So I don't know if you've experienced that or if that's ever a conversation that you have, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of, which I understand when there's no studies, right? Everything is based on protocols. But there doesn't seem to be much of a conversation in the holistic area when it comes to children's cancers.
I think that there's not a much conversation in any area about children. You have to follow the money trail. At the end of the day, does childhood cancer actually make the money? Why isn't there more research done? As hard as that is to say, that's something that we all have to realize. And on a cellular level, everything we eat is deeply affecting us. It's deeply impacting us. And one thing that was very sobering for me to learn is that doctors in school only take 1 or 2 classes about nutrition. They're not nutrition experts by any means. And that's not to discredit doctors. I love my doctors. I have such respect for doctors. But that is not their expertise. That is not their field. You're not going to go to a dentist to be cured for a broken bone. So why would you go to somebody that's not an expert in nutrition and how food works and how herbs work to tell you if that's going to work or not? You can't. And a lot of the times, holistic health and modern medicine doesn't really click. People don't like to put them together. But we
I wonder how much we miss, like how much further along we would be, right, if they put that together.
And we have to realize that cancer feeds on sugar. Cancer feeds on different toxins. Everything we put onto our skin is directly absorbed into our bloodstream. We know that if we have an infection, we get swollen lymph nodes. So what if we're flooding our lymph nodes with aluminum-filled deodorant and fragrance-filled deodorants that we know are linked to Alzheimer's, cancers, the list goes on and on. So we really have to step back and realize, like, okay, what are these ingredients? And yes, it does affect me. And how can I combine this into my lifestyle to help feed my body, to help my body be whole, instead of treating it like a dumpster, instead of just going with the world, actually stepping back and thinking for ourselves.
Yeah. Well, and it's very interesting being here in the US, because what I do full time is I'm in the skincare and cosmetic industry full time. And this is a conversation that I have a lot.
I used to own a natural bath and beauty bakery. So
oh
fun.
My gosh. Yeah. So talking about the ingredients that you're putting on, because when you look at Europe and they ban thousands of ingredients, and we banned, I think, like 30 or something less here in the United States. And a lot of times people think, you know, I'm buying something and it says non-toxic on it, or it says chemical free, or it says all natural. And I'm like, or my others, people say I bought organic skincare, and we really don't have standards for that in the United States, because the Food and Drug Administration covers the organic food, but that's not the same governing body that's overlooking our cosmetics. And so, you know, one of my soapboxes for universal healthcare is that if our government paid for our healthcare, they would be more invested in the food and the products that they allow on the market. You know, in Europe, they don't want to have a product that potentially could give everybody an autoimmune disease, because then the government has to pay for their medicine, right? So take all the political side out of it. We have a vested interest in our government caring about the food, caring about the products that we're putting on, that our children are eating, the dyes that are in our food. I mean, you know, you look at like Kraft macaroni and cheese, and it's made with yellow dye number 5, which is illegal in Europe. And they sell Kraft macaroni and cheese there. They just don't put the dye in it.
Even with our eggs in America, to go in the grocery store, have to go through a wash, and they're covered in bleach. Chicken. Poultry in the U.S. has to go through a wash before it's put in store shelves. So I will not buy poultry from our grocery store.
Wow.
Very interesting to know, and very interesting to step back and realize with our beauty products and just in general with our food products too, we have to be so careful, because a lot of things are greenwashing. Marketers are realizing that we want natural products. People are becoming aware, so they're catching on to it. So they're saying, how can I make my product look better? How can I make it seem like we're starting to care? They use the word natural. They use all these different things and all these their own certifications that mean nothing, to try to manipulate consumers to purchase their products and making them think they're making healthier choices. So when we are seeking to actually be using those products, we have to step back, and we can't take it for granted that this company is marketing as natural, because honestly, for the most part, the big brands out there that are trying to market as natural typically aren't. They pretty much have pretty bad stuff in them.
So do you know about the Cosmos standard?
I don't.
So you would be interested in this, because my daughter uses our line that is Cosmos Standard. It's just cosmostandard.org. And it's basically a bunch of countries got together and had this exact conversation that you're talking about, that there's no truth in labeling. And they wanted transparency for consumers to know what they were actually purchasing. And so it's a very, very strict standard. It has to go, like, products need to be made in a facility that is eco-certified. They monitor every step of the way, including how they pull the plant out of the ground. Because a lot of times in the United States, our plant-based products are harvested with gasoline, with petroleum. So you're thinking, I'm using an all-natural plant-based product that they used petroleum to pull out of the ground. So yeah, I think it's based out of, I want to say Belgium, but it's a bunch of countries who have gotten together and created this standard. But if anybody's interested in that, it's Cosmos, like COSOMS, Cosmos, like the Cosmos, standard.org, and you can just Google it. But it's very fascinating, and I really didn't know much about eco-certification or anything like that until we had a product that had that, and then that's now what my daughter uses. But for a lot of people, you're right, it's very difficult, because it's a full-time job trying to weed through what is toxic and what's not, and all of that kind of stuff. And it's great to hear someone like you who has stood on the other side of, clearly we need Western medicine, right? Like clearly we're grateful that you're here, that my daughter's here, like, all of that stuff has a place. But where are we leaving the body with after treatment?
Yeah. And that's one of my favorite things too. Being a holistic nutritionist is being able to coach people and how to transition into a holistic lifestyle, how to transition into treating our bodies like temples, and how to transition into living a more holistic life. So if anybody's listening to this, I really challenge you to get a coach, get a mentor. If not me, somebody else that can help come alongside you and teach you those things that you're not going to find by just doing it on your own, because it's really overwhelming.
Well, and if you are watching this, we will have the links afterwards down in the comments. And if you're watching this on YouTube, they will all be in the notes section, that you'll be able to connect with Gabby and follow her website, because you do have a great blog.
Thank you.
And your podcast. And so you'll be able to connect her and find her there and on Instagram. And I really appreciate your time taking to come and share. Again, I wish back, like, think 10 years ago, I would have been like, I'm going to follow you. I want to see you, because we didn't have Instagram and stuff like that, where you could see these beautiful survivors, and that you're a mom, and that you have these 2 amazing, healthy kids. Like, you are the dream for almost every childhood cancer parent, right? So do you have anything that you want to kind of leave our listeners with? Anything that you want to share before we finish up?
I just want to leave any listener, if you're a cancer survivor or a cancer survivor parent, or a patient going through it right now, or a parent, like, it is going to be okay. When you're going through chemo and you're going through treatment, it feels so heavy, and it feels like life is never going to seem normal again. But I'm living proof that life can get back to normal, and life can be better than even before. And there's so much purpose in the pain that we go through, because it just proves so much about how beautiful life can be and how wonderful life is when you're out on the other side of it. There's a song that I love, and it's called "The Shadow Proves the Sunshine" by Switchfoot. And if anybody needs a pick-me-up, I really suggest going to listen to that.
Okay, I'm going to put it in the comments. What's it called?
Shadow Proves the Sunshine. I think, hold on, let me make sure the name is right.
Okay.
Shadow Proves the Sunshine by Switchfoot. Shadow, Sunshine, Switch.
Okay, Shadow Proves the Sunshine by Switchfoot. I just put it in the notes, so if you heard it, you can we'll
that's what
put that on there. I love it.
It's so good. Every time, my husband actually took me to their concert last year, and it was just so powerful.
Oh, I love that. I'm going to have to listen to it now, because I'm a big music person. I love words and music and the energy that you surround yourself with from that. And so I'm excited to hear that. And I love that, because it is that taking a deep breath when you're in the middle of it, and to know that this can be a season, but it doesn't need to be forever, and that it's okay. Really, I hope too what people and families get from this is that it's okay to put that in the past. It's okay to move past that. That's not to feel guilty of, like, okay, it's all right that it was a season, but it doesn't define who you are and who you are now and what you're creating now. And I just think that's awesome, and what a testimony that you are to everybody. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you guys all for watching. Make sure you subscribe so you'll know when you're back here on next Wednesday. Share with your friends, obviously, because of the way HIPAA and everything is set out. A lot of times it's more word of mouth that we find other families who are going through the childhood cancer world. And if you are not on Clubhouse, we have so Making Cancer Fun has a club on Clubhouse. It's called the Pediatric Playground. It is a newer group. If you're on the app, you can find us there. But I know Gabby is going to be hosting rooms and sharing her expertise, both within the nutrition, but also as a childhood cancer survivor for families. And we are trying to spread the word on that, because, there's only a very small amount of childhood cancer families that are currently on Clubhouse. And so as that grows, we want you guys to know that this will be a place that you can have live discussions on, and bringing in together moms and child life experts. And I have some doctors that I've recently connected with to be able to have some pretty cool rooms. And so you can check out Gabby and follow her there and find the rooms that she'll be doing live. So thank you guys so much. I hope everybody has a great afternoon. Thank you, Gabby. Bye everyone.